Mobile is the largest technology platform in the history of mankind and a phenomenal arena for innovation, as we have witnessed in the last few decades. Yet, we are seeing that telecom operators, one of the cornerstones of the ecosystem, are struggling with dwindling revenues, slimming profit margins, while the so-called OTT players are thriving. Telecom operators are increasingly looking for new ways to capture new revenues, to increase their profit margins again, or at least reverse that trend. Find a piece of the digital pie that they can start with initially, whether through launching new mobile services or working with existing innovative companies out there and establishing app platforms and APIs. Joining me today on this panel are 4 top executives from some of the region's leading telecom players. They will share their perspectives on the future of telecom. They will discuss the innovation strategies they are pursuing, and they will also respond to some of your interesting questions. So please start preparing. Without much further ado, please help me in welcoming on stage Ben Keneally, CEO of Integral, who comes from many years of experience in Australia in the TV and movie business, and eventually within operators and IPTV propositions, and today is responsible for developing and implementing a strong vision and strategy to deliver great value to STC, where Integral belongs, and develop market-leading products and services, solidifying Integral's position in the MENA region. Next on stage, Dr. Carlos Domingo, Senior Executive Officer for Business and Data Intelligence at Mobily, a new role for Dr. Carlos, who comes actually from Telefonica, where he was heading Telefonica R&D labs, and more recently, the CEO of New Business and Innovation for Telefonica Digital. During his spare times, he's an active mentor, business angel, and a venture advisor. Third on stage is Irfan Goandal, Group Associate Director for Innovations, Partnerships, and Ecosystem Development at Ooredoo Group, coming all the way from Qatar. Thank you for joining us, please. Irfan is an innovation expert, thought leader within the digital field with in-depth understanding of telco challenges and potential diversification or growth strategies. He's focusing on developing and growing Ooredoo's group business into adjacent industries and establishing new revenue streams from digital. Last but not least, and replacing Khalifa AlShamsi, who couldn't join us, is Mohammad Samara, Business Development, Strategic Partnerships, and Big Data Lead at Etisalat Group. Mohammad's focus is on innovation scouting, the Internet of Everything, commerce, smart cities, smart governments, and empowering cities and businesses and Etisalat's consumers through new technologies and services. Thank you very much. Please give them a final round of applause. Welcome, gentlemen. I promise you not to be a very good boy, so I will start with the tough questions. Technology innovation has reached unprecedented highs in the mobile space. We have evolved 4 generations from analog to mobile to 4G right now, and from phones that only did one thing to smartphones that pack the power of a rocket ship. Yet service innovation has been lagging in the last few years at least. Arguably, some say that the last successful mobile operator-driven service was SMS, which was a byproduct of technical work that we were doing, and until a few years ago was one of the largest components of your data revenues, in fact. We, as an industry, tried to replicate the success of SMS with a various string of excesses, I call them. The MMS, the IMS, the RCS, but meanwhile, BBM, followed by WhatsApp and Snapchat, and another flurry of innovative services came and ate most of that cake. What went wrong? Who would like to tackle this one first?
They gave it away. The telcos gave it away. What happened is Apple and the Android platforms, obviously led by Samsung, made a very strong proposition with their own apps and content offerings on their own phones, which the mobile sales guys were more attracted to and saw it as a better short-term play, and they jumped on it worldwide. And now we have a situation where the telcos aren't really in the content play to a big degree, and most of the content is outside of the telcos' control. And now, of course, the loyalty is now shifted from the telcos over to those content houses.
So let me give you a bit of history of what telcos we're doing on SMS. Most people probably don't know because this is a very telco thing, but can you hear me well? So probably like 10 years ago, telcos already had a product that was supposed to replace SMS and add most of the functionality that things like WhatsApp have today. Yep. I think what went wrong and why these products, people don't know them today, is called RCS. You've probably heard of it. Exactly. Has anyone heard of RCS here in the room? And and you're from the telco industry? No? Okay, you're an anomaly in the world because most people not in the telco industry have never heard about that. But RCS basically was supposed to improve SMS and add group functionality, picture sharing, voice sharing, location sharing, etc., etc. So pretty much what WhatsApp does. I think what went wrong is that the approach of how they tried to build that was following the same approach they built SMS. SMS is a standard, it's an industry standard that all device manufacturers integrate, is ubiquitous in the sense that if you send an SMS, everyone that has a device will get it, etc., etc., and it's a network-based service. What has happened the last, I would say, 10, 15, 20 years is that the innovation has moved to the software layer and not to the infrastructure layer. And I think this is what happened to telcos, that they come from a background of hardware and infrastructure, while the innovation moved to the software layer. And they didn't realize that network-based standards are not the way to go anymore, and that software products that become default just by people installing them become the default standards is it what has caught up, basically for one particular reason. If you have a network-based standard, before you can change one functionality and innovate in one particular thing, you have to get the whole industry aligned. Device manufacturers need to implement it, the network manufacturers need to implement it, the telcos need to deploy it. So it takes many years for a new cycle to emerge. This is why it takes many years to go from 3G to 4G, and it will go from 4G to 5G many years. While in the software world, you can innovate very quickly, because you just change, deploy, put it in an app store, and then that's it, you have a new functionality. And that pace of innovation is not possible if you focus on infrastructure and hardware. You need to focus on software. And I think that's where the problem lies, that telcos come from a different industry at the end of the day.
Irfan, what does Ooredoo say about these things?
I think I fully agree in what's been said so far, but also say something that I think two major reasons other than that. One is telco has been very comfortable with kicking in billions of dollars with 40, 60% margins, and now really been focusing on the services. And when they did, I think we were too greedy in terms of working with the third parties. And that meant that we basically pushed the whole ecosystem away, and they found alternative OTT models to get alternative distribution models. So I think that's where we are right now. We need to look into how can we kind of work with the ecosystem, help the ecosystem to develop more innovative services in that space to basically keep the end user retained with us rather than just pushing the way to OTT players.
Right. Mohammad.
I think from my side, I'm very optimistic. I don't see that gloomy picture. I think that the ecosystem has evolved, roles has evolved, and the business model has evolved. We were concentrating before on how to measure data by the minute, while we have to look at how to be cost efficient for those who we need to support. And I don't maybe agree entirely that the OTT is eating our lunch, and I will give some examples later. There are lots of opportunities that we can find a different role in the business and in the value chain and really monetize, and that's why the revenues are growing. Maybe there is different margins according to different business models. We need to work more on the adjacencies, so we were focused more on the core. I think we should look at the adjacencies and learn from them in order to participate, to have the right to participate.
I think you made a good point about the size of the market. I think the other reason why telcos have been reluctant for a long time to get into, let's say, OTT digital services, whatever you want to call it, is because the size of the markets are very different. So the digital space, you add up Google, Facebook, Twitter, all the revenues of all those companies, and it's a fraction, a tiny fraction of what the telco revenue is. Yeah. So for a telco, like, I don't know, Etisalat or Mobily has about 5 billion, or Telefónica has 60 billion in revenue, everything else looks very small. And that's okay when you're doing innovation, but from a financial perspective at the beginning, it looks like it's not going to add any value to me. And then by the time you want to get into a market, because it's big already, then it's too late. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of innovator's dilemma, if you want, is what telcos, which are very financially driven, need to somehow change their mentality if you want to get into new stuff. Okay. At the beginning, it will be small, and you have to assume that.
Ben, from a TV perspective, I mean, the word over the top was really coming even from the TV and video business. How have you, in your previous maybe businesses, managed to bridge that transition and kind of provide a suitable alternative?
Well, let me lead in from where we just kicked off, and then I'll go to there. So, to the statement about telcos have got a lot of revenue now, and more so than OTT play. Yeah, that's true. But the telco revenue is shrinking in regards to the margin. The costs are going up constantly, and voice is dying, if not dead in some areas. And you're left with broadband, which is incredibly cheap in this region. Mobile broadband, unlimited plans is crazy. And you're going to have more and more technology to provide that, and people don't want to pay more and more for it. They want to pay less for that. And so you're getting into a price war. So if you don't have those OTT things or those other products that are attractive, you can't differentiate yourself and you can't set a price premium. When it comes to video, what we're finding is, in the past with video and telco, video used to be run over different frequencies using IPTV technology, which didn't necessarily blend with the customer of why they need more broadband. In fact, if you have fiber, you don't need any more. Whereas what's happening now with OTT, mobile and fixed, is video is now 60–65% of all broadband traffic. By 2017, 2018, it's going to be 90–95% of all video, of all data traffic across broadband. So when you realize voice is dead, broadband's the future, and video is the major play, you need to get good at video delivery over your network. And if you sit back and you're the dumb pipe, and you just let other people deliver their streaming services, their download services, or their BitTorrent services, you just have to keep on building your network up and up and up. But if you get smarter about how you deliver that over, not only do you create a reason why a customer needs more broadband, because they need it to get your content, you can use your content to minimize the traffic across your network and therefore lower your costs in regards to the development, plus give yourself a differentiator and a price premium. So for us, video is a big play of how to actually help our telco partners to really get somewhere.
That's very interesting because I want to ask you, Carlos, about this. I mean, we used to talk about killer apps even before the apps ecosystem was around. Voice was a killer app, then SMS was a killer app. Do you think video is maybe the next killer app?
So I disagree with one of the things you just said. Let me disagree in a constructive way.
I like that.
I think that connectivity is a commodity product. And it doesn't matter what you do, it will be a commodity product. And therefore, and it's a service, right? So I think telcos need to differentiate in two ways they can innovate. One is they need to innovate in their core service by providing a better service, which means it's more the pricing is more targeted, the service is better, it's online, it's ready, the quality is good, things like that. On the other hand, I don't think that OTT is necessarily a way to differentiate connectivity, because the value of OTT precisely is the generalization of the service that is accessible to anyone. And if you assume that, then you can't give it only to your customers because you're reducing the value of the service itself. And therefore, if you give it to all the customers, not only yours, then you can't differentiate with that. So I think that telcos need to go in both directions by understanding that they're two different things and they're not necessarily related. And I think that the fact of trying to think of OTT as something attached to the network, that's where makes telcos less competitive, because the pace of innovation, the moment you are integrated with the network, is going to be slower. So that's one thing. Then with respect to video, I think that's perhaps the only thing where you can think of a little bit of advantage on owning the network, because today's networks are still unreliable for high bandwidth video delivery, and you can bundle the product together. But as you've seen with other services like Netflix, which is not attached to the network, it's a complete OTT, is being more successful than the ones that are bundled. So I still have a little bit of second thoughts about whether video is. I think it will be very important, no doubt about it. But whether you need to sell it as an attachment to your network, or you just need to be competitive on video, irrespective of your network business, that's what I'm.
But let me take on the Netflix play there. So Netflix were just forced into a deal with Comcast to pay for carriage, and they were moaning and angry about this because they see that as just another postal tax, like in the past. But Comcast then delivered the quality of that video better than they were and the competitors around them were doing and are still doing. And now what's happening is people on the Comcast network are getting twice the video speed for the Netflix VOD than they were. And as a result, it attracts people to Netflix to get access to that OTT. Now, that doesn't need to have some special legislation or standards put in place. They just learned how to actually deliver video better. And Sky is doing the same thing in the UK, and Sky is the #1 ISP in the UK.
This rhymes a little bit with the previous...
I think that's a big debate about the Netflix deal with Comcast, whether it infringes net neutrality or not, because you're giving privileged access to an OTT service. So I think that's a lot of debate to say that. But I think these are temporary things. The same way that to deliver VoIP in the past, or to delivering OTT messaging, you needed the network. As the networks got better, that necessity disappeared because best effort networks were good enough to deliver that service. I think the same thing will happen to video eventually. So temporarily, yes, there is an advantage on that. In the long run, there is not. So.
I'm just listening to the previous speaker from Cloudera. He said not all your databases need to be on first class. So the question is, does all video or data need to be at the same class? And how much do you think people are willing to pay for that? You're saying that eventually people will not pay anymore. Everybody will be flying anyway, upgraded to first class.
I'm not saying they won't pay. I'm just saying that you will not need to pay to the network. I mean, you always have to pay some network infrastructure, right? All video companies pay. Google pays because they have their own CDN. Yeah. That CDN is connected to data centers. Those data centers need bandwidth. So it's always an infrastructure underneath all those companies that they're paying to some telco. What I'm saying is that this will be accessible to everyone because best effort networks will deliver a good video experience. Temporarily, probably not, and this is why Netflix is doing what it's doing in the US. Long run, I think that won't happen. That does not necessarily mean that people will not pay for the video service anyway. I mean, Netflix is not free. People pay for Netflix because you have to pay the cost, you have to pay the content. You saw in the previous presentation that from Unilever, they mentioned the content space is 5 times bigger than the advertising space, therefore you can't expect content to be free. So I totally agree, video is a good place to make money. Operators have certain advantages at the beginning, plus they can extend their brand there. But whether that's, you need to be competitive on the video product itself and not just because you own the network.
On the content itself. What does Ooredoo look at in terms of the next killer apps beyond the video? What are you doing to find these apps and ecosystems?
Well, I think our main focus is to look into how can we enable the ecosystem to innovate and offer services across the value chain rather than doing in-house development. So it's all about can we do some sort of quality of services differentiation for different services. That's one. We can offer payment to ecosystem and still can get access to markets. So we are moving into enabler play rather than in-house developments and so forth. Looking at our network, increasing the quality of that, making it attractive to quality content players to access our customers, where we still retain the relevance to our end users. In terms of video, we are also looking into how can we, in the markets that we don't have fixed access, how can we do an OTT play in that space? What sort of architectures are required to enable those sort of services? In terms of content, we don't see ourselves being the content developers ourselves because we don't have the capabilities or interest or focus of that. And there's a lot going on in the ecosystem to capture and package and develop a proposition for the markets. So our focus is a lot in enabling rather than developing in-house, and that enabling can even happen through JV with companies that are in certain, bring certain capabilities to the table, enable certain markets, enable certain verticals, and so on.
You recently announced a deal or a partnership with Rocket Internet to address innovation in Southeast Asia. Is this part of this drive?
Exactly. So that's a very, so we had that's a very bold movement into e-commerce space, which is a bit far from the core. But we believe that we can drive some synergies in the markets we are present, like Indonesia and Pakistan, in Asia, in Philippines. But we also believe that by working with a pioneer, a very strong player in internet e-commerce space, like Rocket Internet, we can penetrate those markets and develop new adjacencies and protect our future business in this space.
Gotcha. What is Etisalat doing in that space? Are you partnering with anybody to invest in new ideas in the region?
Yes, I think one of the famous internet holding here is Amina, who spoke and paneled lots of sessions. And Etisalat, from the beginning, they didn't want to invest directly with startups, because typically our governance would basically kill the startups. So we participated in a friendly company that knows the startups, has the DNA of the startups. It's a startup by itself, in order to nourish and give us access to this the garage of ideas, which are going to be the next Google or next Facebook of the region. There are lots of good opportunities, I think, and some of them we've seen past 3 days. But let me go also on the part where the innovation, and you say how we do on the video and stuff. I think the innovation is not to compete with the OTTs. It's how to coexist. And coexisting is to be a friendly environment for them, to have the Etisalat invested in fiber to the home, became the first city in the world in penetration, and the second one in the world as a country. How to build a cloud for them, to foster them to become more cost efficient, closer to them as a speed and experience. It has also services. We've announced 2-3 days ago, I think everybody see how we provided monetization engine for Google. So this is where we don't compete. They are not on top, they are not on the side. We are having a win-win situation where there is a carrier billing. Anybody can purchase an app and it will be on his bill. He doesn't need to fiddle with a credit card anymore. And this is for the services and also for the data. I think there is lots of innovation on data. We basically focused a lot on the infrastructure. We started learning on the services, some of them on the video. 10 years ago when we created eVision, became eLife. eLife, not only an infrastructure play, it becomes an OTT by itself. So everybody can see it. We're moving from personal to personalized, and there's a difference. Personal, that means it is you who see it. Personalized, it's tailored to your behavior. And we're going to, you will start seeing lots of experience and content, behavior driving that, what is being delivered to you. From a data perspective, and we'll talk about it later, is how to make it accessible, learnable for others to create. So this is the thing that brands, startups, everybody is looking at. All of this is innovation. So we don't need to compete. This is large space, large economy, and the GDP would benefit from it.
If I go back to the Google Play example, is this only available now in the UAE, or will it be available across the Etisalat footprint?
It started, and it will catch fire. So you'll see announcement, I don't know, maybe every quarter of, or every few months, or that our market is going to start launching. So as much as the Google is helping and having bandwidth, we will start more markets going with carrier billing. And there are lots of others. BlackBerry, there's Microsoft, there's Samsung. There are other companies who are waiting for those assets to monetize further. So one of the, I think Dave yesterday said, look at two things for startup: scale, monetization. We provide both.
But arguably, you are providing this to big, giant OTT players. But and also, when we are talking about the small companies that are around the region that you are investing with, are you offering Google the same terms that you would invest a local app developer or content providers in terms of the revenue split?
We never say no to opportunity. There's every service. There's no one bullet that shoots all. So it depends on the opportunity, how we can make that win-win formula. So some of them, they're doing like a taxi service. Some of them, they're doing a delivery for food. There are all of things. So there's no one business model. I cannot say that there is freemium, there is transactional, so it differs.
I think there's an important difference between large companies and small companies. The amount of time you dedicate to make a deal with Google is not sustainable if you dedicate the same amount of time to a tiny company. So if you want to deal with, let's say, the long tail of startups and offer them like carrier billing, your carrier billing APIs need to be self-fulfillment. So you need to be able to sign up on the web. get the contract, get the terms very clear, and start using the API without anyone from the telco side being involved. Because the moment someone from the telco side gets involved, that deal is probably not profitable.
Sure. Self-service.
Yeah. But this is what we were talking about earlier, Ben and myself. There is, what I was wondering is that in the cases, for instance, today of Etisalat, of STC, maybe of Mobily, I don't know about Ooredoo's groups, you have established these digital units who are kind of separate entities almost from the main company.
So actually within Ooredoo Group, we have a separate business unit, which is a digital services unit where we have dedicated focus on exactly enabling. For instance, so we also
even Ooredoo. Yeah. So my question is that, first of all, is this a contradiction? Because at the end of the day, all our business is digital. Are you separating digital into a separate organization where the rest of the company is now what, analog, and they are being kind of incentivized on KPIs which are traditional analog KPIs? Because our feeling is that the rest of the organization may be still looking at subscribers and ARPUs and regular numbers. But also, I'm not judging. I'm saying, is this right or is this wrong, perhaps? So
we just recently,
why these decisions?
We just recently saw that Telefonica Digital is moving back to the core. I think Carlos can comment on that further. But there's a definite need internally in the telco organizations to split the processes and the governance of core business and new business, because digital services is much more fast-paced, internet speed sort of activities, and if you're stuck into legacy telco processes, then you get nowhere, because simple projects in telcos process takes months and months and months, while digital space has to be weeks. So that's why there's a need to have a dedicated focusing on launching digital services, but you cannot stay that far away from core because you need the synergies of getting customer access, bundling props, and so on. So building should be very fast of those services, but getting to a market, you need to level your core services anyway. So
I think that, if you look at, let's say, innovation theory, there is a very famous book called The Innovators Dilemma. There's a guy called Clayton Christensen wrote it. And in the book, he explained why large companies, and let's forget about telcos for the time being, talk about large companies in general, don't innovate. And the reason they don't innovate is because what, the core skill of people, top managers on a large company is actually the opposite of the core skill that you need in innovation. So some guys that run a very large business are good at, controlling a predictive business, making sure it's on track, they deliver the quarterly results, it's very financially driven, etc. Innovation is about being able to work under uncertainty, businesses that are not very good at the beginning, that are small, you need to celebrate the small things to get them to be bigger. In the case of the telco specifically, the technologies that you manage are very different. It's software versus hardware and infrastructure, as we discussed, etc., etc. So if you read why, according to Christensen, why large companies don't innovate, is precisely because they make the mistake of putting the new businesses run by the people that are good at running the old large business. And then that doesn't work. So the reason to separate it, I think, is that is precisely to do that. Now, if you separate it, but then you take the people of the core business and put it to run the new business, then it fails. So it has to be separated, not for the sake of being separated, but for the sake of understanding that these are two different businesses that require different metrics, different KPIs, different people, different processes, etc. And then the new businesses needs to pick very carefully what is it going to use from the large business to help them that doesn't become a liability. Because everything that might slow them down or might make them work differently, then you shouldn't pick it up because it's a liability, it's not an asset.
Look, STC went as far as possible by creating a whole separate company, putting it in Dubai here.
Well,
what do you say?
I'm sure others will do the same soon, but I agree with exactly what was just said there. I would add to that, though, in our case, I think there was honesty. There was honesty that the telco knew their core business. And let's face it, telcos are utilities. They didn't come up with the idea of this access, be that phone calls or data flow. It's all about access. It's about selling access, and in many cases, reliable access. When you come to a lot of these ideas of innovation and content, they're about creating desire. They're about creating a customer experience that attracts people to want to use it, not because they have to, but because they want to. Now, that's a completely different mentality than what's in a telco. So what I've seen around the world is a lot of the telcos have lost the ability to innovate. They've lost the ability to be able to create their own business models. They gave that away. Instead, what they do is they go to big vendors and consultants to help them with all that thinking. And they stick to being a great operator, being a great sales force, and an executive who've turned into politicians. Now, the smart guys realize that in many cases they can't do it within. And therefore, we have to actually put something outside of the company, hopefully set it up in the right funding vehicle so it doesn't have to worry about short-term cash flow. Hopefully get them into a situation where they're given the time to actually start to foster ideas, build the right talent, come up with things that are interesting for the customers, and probably the most important thing is be receptive of the ideas that these new companies bring back to the telcos. And in many cases, I think what you see worldwide is that's where there is an issue. There still is an issue where the senior executive in a big company, even though they've been told by their consultants they need to do something to have a differentiator, to set a price premium, you need to innovate, you need to think differently, you need to add content. The reality is the senior executive in the companies are not from that world. And so even when they do detach people on the outside and they come back in, they're not really able to understand exactly what's happening. Now, what we hope is people obviously over time get educated and respectful about such things and embrace it. Or otherwise what will happen is others, which they're doing right now, compete with them from all different angles, be that other telcos, be that OTT players, be that people in adjacent industries like pay TV, all coming in to take that space. So it's starting to happen. It needs to happen more.
I think also the telcos need to realize you're not competing with OTT because you've never had any service except for SMS. That's probably the only service, and at some point in time, very soon voice. But everything else, as telcos, we've never had any of those services. So when I hear sometimes, look at what Google is doing with Android to the telcos. Google is not doing anything with Android to the telcos. You've never had an operating system to start with, and you've never invested a penny on doing that. They're just playing on a different layer. If you assume that scenario, and then you need to be good at the layer where you're working on, and you need to make sure that part is not commoditized as much as possible, that is relevant to customers, etc. And if you want to play on the other layers, you need to assume that's a different ball game and it's a different scenario, a different part of the value chain.
I also think, I think you touched upon it earlier, that we missed a train in terms of developing user experience. I think the user is looking for a different user experience rather than just dialing and calling, right? Mainly you're texting and you get a nice visual interface, you want to interact through that. And telco has completely failed developing that kind of user experience. And we need to even develop that sort of interfaces for our core services. If you, for instance, experience that if you do international calling, the OTT voice quality is actually better than your normal circuit street quality, right? Which is, again, a user experience thing. And the whole rich communication around that, which is called RTS, unfortunately, which has become a kind of, we're talking it to death, basically. So we need to create a buzz around that telcos can actually deliver the user experience that is at least as good as OTT services, and that way attract the end users staying with those services, basically.
From my side, I think it was about 3 points. We didn't go to the extreme of spinning it off. It was always internal. Internal because we wanted to keep it actually closer to the business. But 3 points was one of the mind share. So we wanted to have that priority of digital. When you put a business case together, if you compare the revenues of that thing to revenue of telecom, it will not go. Basically, that one will always prioritize. Yeah. Always this. So this is one. Number two is specialization. We created a talented group who are focused on specific things. So the specialization and the focus were important for us because we wanted to make it clear for the ecosystem that now we are more approachable because there is a telco and there is a digital which has similarities to your business. So we wanted to have those 3 points in the mindset of our leadership. That's why Khalifa, who was supposed to be here, he's leading that verticals, and we are announcing what we are focusing on. So we make it clear for our shareholders and stakeholders what are we going to do and what we are not going to do.
I have a good question here, if you allow me, on what you said, also for the rest of you. You said that the revenues are never going to be the same. At least initially, we all agree to that. But also there is an issue of a profile of investment or expectations from revenue models. I mean, do you feel that, considering also that there were many attempts in the past, that your shareholders, your boards, your managements are willing to start looking at revenue from these deals differently than, or from these projects differently than from a pure, what is the ARPU, what is the traditional way of accounting for it?
I think that this is looking at, comparing the two revenue pools is the wrong way at looking at. And let me tell you the way I always try to explain it before at Telefonica. If you're a telco that makes 10 billion, that's a huge number, right? So there's no way you're gonna change the revenue numbers.
Nothing will start with 10
because
billion.
nothing will be big enough. I always used to joke, nothing will be big enough to be on the Excel of the CFO. The Excel spreadsheet of the CFO, your business will never be there.
The legal part, at least.
But now, you look at it at a different perspective. If you're a telco that makes 10 billion, and as Ben said, your revenues are declining, let's say 2%, then 2% of 10 billion is 200 million, right? So 200 million, suppose you can build a digital business that makes 400 million a year, then suddenly you're not a declining business, you're a growth business. Modest, but growth business. And that completely changes the picture. So you need to look at it from the perspective of how much can change the profile of my company and how much of the percentage of the growth will come from digital services, not from the percentage of overall revenues, because the overall revenues will be, for a very, very long time, will still come from the traditional business. There's no way you're going to replace one with the other one. Now, the growth part could actually come from digital services, and it doesn't have to be that big, because it would only need to be 1 or 2% of the total to suddenly move you from no growing to growing. And if you look at that perspective, then the digital services business is very attractive. So,
did STC give Integral that kind of allowance, let's say, to go and start small and
you gonna tell the truth?
After a few years, do you see that your current traditional business fueling your new type of businesses?
Well, one of the initial mistakes, in my opinion, was that we were set up with the same financial expectations in regards to growth, EBITDA, etc., as the telco. And as was just pointed out, the contribution we can make is never going to be sizable enough to get their interest, and therefore you're always going to be looked down upon. But that's the wrong way to look at it, and what we've been doing is trying to change them into two angles. One, the idea of contribution. Is there something you can do that not only can make cash, but can actually help you make more cash or reduce churn, or improve your ARPU, or improve your brand consideration? Now, to me, that's a big part of what innovation and content services can bring to a telco. In many cases, you don't make a lot of money out of content on these services, but you'll make money out of how to get to the content. Very much like in many ways, the cinema industry. The cinemas don't make a lot of money out of movies. They make the money out of the popcorn and the soda and other things like that. So if we can actually help the telcos understand that these innovations, these content services, can actually give them something that differentiates them, that holds their customers to their network and as a result reduces their churn, and hopefully improves pull-through from other networks and potentially some new revenue, fantastic. But there's also one other area, which is the idea of asset value. There's most of these big web companies that have started, that are the big ones today, had no revenue to start with. And 4 years, 5 years later, they had this huge customer base, which is now worth a lot of money, and now they can start to monetize that by advertising or any other means. That's another side of the coin here, three-sided coin. That's another side here that we need to encourage the telcos. Now, so in our case, we're definitely trying to push them from direct revenue to indirect revenue and value addition, as well as asset value. So far, it's working, but not to the right degree yet.
Mohammad, do you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I wanted to say some of the opportunities you go and create. And some of the opportunities are basically like us as a local company as a responsibility, because you are touching the hospitals, you're touching the education, you're touching the retail, and when the whole city wants to be smart, you have a bigger opportunity and bigger responsibility to commit to. So if you look at what we, as Etisalat, doing from an infrastructure and from a digital, both are complementary. They have to be packaged, bundled, provided to the city in order for it to run smarter. Also from the startups who would like to make money later on, if you provide them with a platform. And we like to look at ourselves as also as a digital, we are a regional platform, but also in each country we have that platform in order to extend the service for advertisers to provide to the brands. So we have the B2B2C, we have the B2G, we have the C2C. All of this is required as opportunity, as a responsibility. So not everything shows as a business case. It has to also have other sense and factors into it if you want to participate in the GDP of the country.
Talking about revenue, my question, and whoever would like to start answering, is we're still treating the revenue in a very traditional way. This is a minute in the past, and now this is a megabyte, which, by the way, a minute might be a little bit measurable by a human brain, but a megabyte is totally unmeasurable. Meanwhile, in the app industry, we have seen a lot of innovation on business model, just on the revenue model at least. Just the freemium model just turned the whole thing around. So are you looking at new ways to actually sell these services and package them beyond this is how much a gig will cost?
Let me share with you some ideas. Sometimes we are flipping the business model on its head by using the data to subsidize the services, where sometimes partially, sometimes fully, in order to remove market barriers. Sometimes there are multiple business models in the equation. It just evolves. So it is freemium model. After you choose scale, you just switch overnight to monetization. So there's, as I said before, there are a few ways that we have learned by participating in this industry. I said that Etisalat does not invest directly, but this creation of digital made us learn that we don't mandate the business model. We actually react to the market and sometimes proactively from the data that we have. So if you want to understand if it's transactional or freemium, I don't think that is that. And before I forget, it was said that the Samsung ends up are driving. I think it is the customer behavior who's driving. So it is not a voice. Right now, our children are texting more than they're speaking. So how do you monetize that? How do you insert an advertisement on that app? How do you, is it a display? Is it a CPM? Is your data, when you tailor it, it becomes 100% valued as a targeted than CPM? I don't think anybody here can answer, even the advertiser. I think that once we are discussing with them, we are all learning what is the relevance that we're trying to create in the market.
I think that it's very attractive to think telcos can do freemium or can subsidize connectivity with advertising, but I think that's a very naive way of seeing the problem. First, you need to understand the telco industry and the, let's say, software digital services industry. The economics of the two industries are entirely different. And then, what are the differences? The main difference is that the telco industry is hugely capital intensive, very costly to support and serve one customer, but then huge margins. So EBITDA is very good. If you look at the software industry, it's the opposite. Almost no capital required, and even less the last 10 years with cloud services and infrastructure services, because everything is OpEx, so everything is you pay as you consume. Very cheaply to serve one customer. Bad margins. I mean, EBITDA margins are not what it is in the telco industry. In some cases, extreme EBITDA margin is 0 because you're not making any revenue. But the return on capital investment is very high. Now, if you understand those economics, then certain things like freemium is impossible to do it on the telco business. Why? Because freemium is based on a very low cost to support a customer that will be covered by a very small percentage paying and everyone else not paying. And that doesn't apply to a business that is capital intensive. So economically, they are different business because they're very different, economic structures. So you cannot just carry over one business model from one side, one business model to the other side.
Or could you add to that that the telcos don't know how to do that because they're so used to huge capital investment and their cost of development is intense because they go through all their very large vendors, that when it comes to doing some sort of very light thing, they can't do it.
It's true that telcos could be more efficient by not using the traditional telco vendors, but the majority of the capex comes from spectrum and comes from the hardware in the network, which is something to some extent unavoidable.
Let me a little bit have a perspective on that. Is that maybe it is relative. Freemium to the customer is different. It doesn't mean that it is free to the operator. Sometimes you are working with the retail, right? And you're getting your money in a different way. Still, the customer thinks it's free. It's a free Wi-Fi in Dubai, free Wi-Fi in the mall, free Wi-Fi in the bus, but doesn't mean that it is free to the operator. So those B2B2C and B2G are becoming, now being created. Today being created, and we are learning how they are.
But on the infrastructure, I'm curious now that you brought it up. Like we're seeing also Google and Facebook and other players moving into let's provide our own service. Google is running fiber in the US. They're launching balloons, and I think Etisalat is probably worried about what's happening in Africa. Facebook wants to launch the drones as well. They will be also hit by these capital investment. However, do you feel that they're comfortable going that direction because in fact it's kind of bypassing the operator, and they have enough know-how into how they make money from the content that they're fine with that investment?
Well, I think
how do you see it from
these are toy business. I mean, they're very, very tiny experiments at the moment.
Of
for
course.
Those companies. So.
But if a telco is not worried about those things, they've got their head in the sand. You just announced the other day, Google's putting up 180 satellites to do free broadband, at first to the third world. And you also have Zuckerberg running around saying, we want to give internet to everybody, which is fantastic. But by the way, one of those free services is going to be Facebook, which he still makes money on the advertising. And these guys quite easily could extend further that network into the first world. And if you look at things like Google Fiber, it's arguably the best broadband service in regards to a customer experience in the country. And they're coming at it from a completely different mentality of which they're actually creating the innovation in-house rather than going to, as I said earlier, going constantly out to these big vendors and losing the ability to innovate. So if I was the telcos, I would be very worried about these big guys moving into these spaces.
I mean, the telcos were in a very similar position. Coming from the industry, I know is that the innovation that the telcos did in the 90s and your tough requirements on the industry is what, kind of fueled all the innovation at the time to develop cellular and 3G,
or remember the statement about Innovators Dilemma. It's exactly the same situation.
Where are you pushing that? I mean, if you are going to push higher, which every innovator eventually has to do, what surprises some people a lot is that, for instance, if you look at the latest, just as an example, nothing about Etisalat, but relating to the region, Etisalat invested in a big share in Morocco Telecom recently for around $6 billion. That's enough to buy Instagram, Tumblr, and Nest. Like $6 billion going into an investment which is very, very, very traditional. I'm not saying that you should buy Instagram, Nest, and Tumblr, but at least are your effort being funded anyway close to these numbers? And is the money really well spent there?
I think that the same way that Etisalat spent $6 billion in buying Moroccan Telecom, Facebook will never do that investment because the business case that Etisalat has will not work for a company like Facebook because there's no synergies, there's no way to monetize those assets, etc. The other way around also applies. If we were a telco were to buy Instagram, you would not be able to monetize off Facebook or WhatsApp like Facebook. Those companies first, they're not non-profit, they're for profit like telcos. So that's what everyone needs to understand. It doesn't matter how many things they say. At the end of the day, they have a business case and have a business plan, how they're going to get back the 16 billion, 5 billion, whatever to their investors because that's their fiduciary duty for the shareholders. The problem is that business case, and I've seen some of them like the YouTube acquisition for Google, is not going to work unless you have some other assets that will complement the one you acquire. And the other way around also works. For telcos buying all the telcos, they have certain business case in terms of synergies, in terms of scale, et cetera, that if a non-telco buying that business will never get it, will never be able to justify the price. So
Agreed, and you probably have seen that experience in Telefonica as well. But the question is is the investment done into the new areas that you gentlemen are overseeing, even, in the same order of magnitude that what we are talking about, and what does it take to start shifting a little bit of that money?
Let me
You're directly concerned by this question.
Yeah, it's just that, as I said from the very beginning, we are not there to replace the OTT, and I don't think the OTT has aspiration today to become the telecom operator. Each one stick to the knowledge of what they've done. Until now, I'm telling you, we are very, very confident that the voice will not die tomorrow. But when we go to countries, as it has been said, that there are lots of synergies. We go there strategically. We build relationship with economies and countries. We cannot disrupt the model by saying we concentrate on the C market. It has to be the C, the B, and the G. And the industry for telecom, it is very important for economies. And I don't think that if we wanted to buy those companies, we can, but we will not run them the way that it is run. It is coexistence that I think, and competition is what we're looking for.
Carlos, what do you think?
I was saying it's not a problem of whether you run it one way or another one. Is that the business case that someone like Facebook has done, saying I buy a company that has 1 billion users, the funding of the company costs me this much, they add, I don't know, 1 million users per month, so eventually it gets to this size, and therefore, if I can then monetize at a fraction of what Facebook monetizes this base, I'll make this much money, plus then I have the other part of the business case saying that also avoids my competitor Google buying the company, and it gives you a number that justifies 16 billion, okay? The same business case, if you do it from other industry, and telcos at the end of the day, or other part of the value chain, even someone like Qualcomm, then it will not work. Because some of the math that you put there to justify a 16 billion valuation, which does not apply to your business. Mm-hmm. And the same way, as I said, we acquire a company in Brazil, and we spent 6 billion. We've acquired, when I was in Telefonica, we acquired the second largest operator in Germany. You are paying almost twice what the company is valued in the market, and people wonder why. Well, because the business case for you in terms of merging with your existing operation, synergies, taking it from our competitor, etc., justifies the valuation.
Exactly.
And I think for telcos, or for anyone in adjacent industries, justifying the valuations with financial numbers is very hard. So.
That's why, by the way, we don't invest in US or Europe, because we want to stick with those synergetic geographic locations.
There are some very smart, intelligent people in the room. So I want to open the floor for them to ask a few questions before we break. And meanwhile, I'll give you a small question to prepare. What is the top challenge that you want to give to these people to help you innovate in your space? But we have a question, I think, already here, ready for a while. Go ahead, PK.
Thank you very much for a great session. So starting with Ben, one of the first things you said in this debate was that the price of broadband is cheap here. I don't know if you've been here very, very recently. I think the price of broadband is not cheap by any stretch of standards. If you just look at it, mobile broadband, unlimited 2 to 4 GB kind of unlimited.
I think he's referring to the Saudi market.
Probably you're talking about just one market in the region.
Well, look, let's take mobile broadband, right? So I won't bore you with the technology, but you've got limited frequency. You've got limited throughput through a cell. You can only put as many cells up down a street. If you have a dense population all try to use high quality video over that, they're going to clog your network. And the amount of money you get from that data flow is not enough to pay for the frequencies.
But don't give me the reason that I'm talking about as a customer. I'm putting the customer hat and I'm asking is why does, for example, AT&T in the US, which is not exactly the most competitive telco, give me a $60 unlimited all I can use, by the way, broadband plus voice plus premium SMS plus. And here, I give more than $100 just for the broadband, and by the way, I pay premium voice on top, I pay SMS on top, so it's no more there. My question was more on the lines of...
There's no unlimited in the US.
Yeah, correct.
And there's no unlimited in Europe.
I said 2 to 4. I said 2 to 4 GB unlimited.
Okay, so that's a different story. The unlimited tariffs that you guys have here, this is paradise and it's going to end because it's already ended everywhere else in the world.
Locally in the UAE, it's already ended, but I'm saying there's a cap on that. But my question was different. So what I'm saying is, then we come down to this fact where you say that in the, telcos are too complicated, too big, managers are not right, you cannot do innovation. So, but all of you sitting up on the table have tried doing it, Every one of the telcos still tries and spends a lot of money having innovation departments, people trying to build digital companies and stuff, and then compete with the startups in this room. They have no chance of doing it. How do you think you're going to solve this innovation question mark?
So I think there's entrepreneurs everywhere. There's entrepreneurs in startups, and there's entrepreneurs in the big companies as well. I think what you have here is obviously entrepreneurs who've come out of the big companies, and to a degree, some of them are slightly more out of the big companies than the other. But what I said earlier was to be able to give the freedom needed to innovate and to create the right customer propositions, particularly around this app, IP, content space. It's good to be able to break the shackles from the telco. It's good to be able to think differently. It's good to be able to have different HR policies. And particularly in this region, where there is a lot of sensitivities about certain content, it also makes sense to break it outside of there so it can work a little freer. In our case, you know, our parent is STC, a very conservative incumbent telco, very big, makes a lot of money, but they still see the need for innovation and how to manage content correctly to be able to differentiate their network. And as a result, they saw the need to break it off outside. What was also said is we're not competing with OTT players. You know, I think it's clear to make that point. We should be partnering, but we should also be embracing trying to do some of these things ourselves. In the case of Integral, we're now moving from being an arm of the telco to being an OTT company owned by telcos. And our focus will be creating product, OTT product, for the telco, but done in a viable startup mentality that can allow it to be faster, cheaper, potentially better, with customers and more appealing to customers that we can then bring back to the telcos. And that's our model we're embracing.
I think if you're a startup and you worry about competition, you shouldn't worry about telcos, because I think your main competition will come from you know, the largest players on the digital services and OTT space, that they invest 100% of their R&D on those type of services, while telcos, as it has been discussed here, is still a fraction of what they do that goes to the OTT. So that's number one thing. Second, they have a higher likelihood of being successful just because they have other assets that complement better what they do. So it's easier for Google to deploy a new digital service and integrate it with all their ID, integrate it with all their services, put it on the homepage and make it popular, than for a telco that doesn't have any of those assets and only the network.
From my side, I think I would just comment to that. I run the scouting program for Etisalat. I'd love to see all those startups. We don't create something, we don't program. So we would like to have more of those partnerships to package it and throw it in the market.
That's why you're investing in the region for it.
Yeah, of course.
There is a startup OTT who tweeted some interesting comments. So the mic for Sam.
Hi, I'm Samir. I'm the CEO of an OTT player called Istakana, OTT Video, in fact. So my sense is that you know, innovation's a big word, and I think where I see a lot of this discussion has been centered around innovation with respect to consumer-facing software. And as has kind of been mentioned, during this panel, but I'll emphasize it more. You know, there hasn't been an example globally, or I would challenge you to find one, where a telecoms company has successfully made a consumer-facing software product that has really changed the game. There may have been one or two, but it's certainly not very common. You know, in terms of telcos setting up separate departments to try and do this, they're reinventing the wheel. There are already people that do this. And so I'm very glad to hear that there's talk of partnership. I'd like to see it implemented a bit more. And where I think innovation could really happen are on the areas where telcos are very good at, like namely getting money from people and delivering voice and data and providing pipelines. I mean, when it comes to payments, which as a startup we're involved with and are actually currently working with many of you, or not directly, but with some of your colleagues, it would be great to have a lot of focus on payment APIs, for instance, right? I mean, some of your telcos, I don't know if you know, but some of your junior colleagues in the tech department do not have documented APIs for payments.
Come and talk to me afterwards. Actually, just to add to that, Ooredoo, we actually put up a central platform that connects all our regional opcoins to that, and from that we expose payment APIs, messaging APIs, you name it.
Awesome.
We launched BlackBerry, Samsung, other partners on that, so people can pay very easily through their credit and postpaid.
So you see, I mean, I wish, you know, the innovation discussion when it comes to telcos is revolving around that type of thing, where it's really providing complementary services that will allow consumer-facing companies like us to interact with you, and for telcos to get a piece of the pie, and for us to get a piece of the pie, and for everyone to get a piece of the pie and make money.
So
and be successful.
we're creating that right now. We've got a product called iHub, which is basically a telco PayPal, and using the carrier billing, because credit cards are still not trusted around here, using carrier billing as the way to make it work. Now there's many tricks here. You've got to be able to get the telco to embrace this. Telcos in many cases have been used to different revenue shares, which is an issue that we have to tackle.
Of course.
You know, the fact that telcos are asking in some cases 50% of the share of the transaction is ludicrous. It should be down at 3.5% to 7%. And then you're competing with a credit card, and therefore the market will become much, much larger, and customers will be happy to stay with the telco billing. Of course, telco billing's got limited, particularly through an SMS, a limited buying power, so you can't buy that $5,000 whatever. There would be interesting areas to go into that in the future, but transactions, I think, is something that a lot of us are embracing, right?
I think this. It sounds very good in paper that carrier billing can play a role, but there's a number of difficulties I found, and I was running the, you know, among many other projects in Telefonica, the carrier billing project. And there's two problems. One, Ben just mentioned. In the past, SMS Premium had huge margins. When you go back to an operating business in a telco and tell them, you need to open up an API, and by the way, because a developer only gets, you know, Google only gets 30% of what the developer gets. Therefore, Google also needs to make some money, so you can only at most charge maybe 15 to 10%. And the guys say, well, I'm charging 50% for SMS Premium. Why should I go to this payment method that has lower margins? And this is the same Innovators Dilemma that I mentioned before. Well, you need to do it because the other business is going to disappear, so you need to build a new business. And sorry about it, but the new business is less, you know, attractive in terms of margins. But that's a reality that is going to happen no matter what you do. So you need to prepare for it, and that's a difficult conversation.
Yeah, which is not a technological problem, by the way. It is just
it's a mentality problem.
Yeah, it's just a business model.
So basically, the answer is, you know, if I can summarize it, maybe the guys are too humble to say it, but what you're seeing in front of you is the human API of all these operators.
Yeah.
Theoretically are much faster, much nimbler organizations that you should be talking to when you want to do business with.
If you allow me just 30 seconds on
it's the easiest part. I think it's the easiest part.
On payment, there is another huge problem, which is prepaid. Because a prepaid customer, for the telco, has a huge cost of putting the money into the prepaid, so top up. And then if you use it for payments, the margins are squeezed to a point that even if you convince the telco to only take 10 or 8% margin, it might still not be enough to actually consume that. And there's also an opportunity cost of, you know, you're using your prepaid balance to pay for a game versus voice, which voice has, you know, 90% margin versus paying a game that will have like 5% margin. So
I think what you're trying to say is how to evaluate innovation. It is clearly how do you measure that this revenue share justifies better than the other one. That's the case.
I'm going to have to cut it short now because the organizers are getting nervous. We have one last question.
Can you hear? Okay. We have a question from someone who's watching you on live stream. I'm going to read it. It's from Farouk Naim. What stops telecoms in MENA in providing affordable, limitless broadband packages when third world countries can do it?
Could you repeat the question? Or it was hard to
What's
hear.
stopping you from providing affordable, limitless broadband packages when other telcos in poorer countries are doing it?
The cost?
Yeah, the cost of network.
The cost.
For our side,
Etisalat, you're operating in much emerging markets. What's your cost base there?
In Africa, We don't want to go into the comparison between market to market and stuff, but each market has its own conditions and limitations. There's no such thing, and I can challenge that even in more
What is clear to me, I think, is that there's a perception issue.
Yeah, exactly.
You think this reason is too cheap, PK is arguing against, obviously. So, and maybe it boils down to what we were talking about earlier, that this megabyte, gigabyte discussion is so hard to measure that, and maybe on purpose it is so hazy on purpose so that people just spend money. Perhaps it's something to be rethought.
It has to be affordable, not cheap. But
exactly,
affordable.
to be affordable actually was the question. So I gave you a small task to pinpoint one challenge in 140 characters, Twitter style, so that the people can tweet it as well. What would you like to hear back from this audience when they visit you next week or during the lunch break after this?
Well, I've been in this area for a year and a half, in this territory and in this field for a bit longer than that. I've been amazed about how many people in this region are online and are living online and are using their mobiles or their fixed to socialize, to communicate, to entertain themselves and so on. But then I'm even more amazed how little is coming out of this region in regards to apps and websites that is for this region. We saw this for a long time now, and of course we're trying to do our little bit, but what we did is we set up an incubator called AFCAR that was meant to find the entrepreneurs out there who need assistance, who need a start, and we incubate them. We give them a bit of money, we try to educate them, mentor them, we give them access to our facilities, and we even give them a revenue stream at the end. So we're doing that, and at the end there is VC. There's late-term VC here in this market, as we were saying earlier to another colleague. There seems to be a gap in the middle area, the angel funders, the people who get in there early with $100,000, $1 million, who can help these entrepreneurs, these startups, take that good idea and actually start to get it out to the market. There seems to be kind of a gap in confidence about what this could mean. But at the same time, I can see that there is a great aptitude to back something that could go international out of this region. What I would appeal to the audience, as well as potential investors out there, is start to look in that angel funding to the first level funding area, to be able to be confident about ideas from this region that could do great things for this region, but could definitely go beyond this region. And I think everybody would be very proud of that, and there would be lots of late market funding coming in as a result of doing that. But we need this bridge.
Carlos.
I will say from what I'm hearing here, and take it with a grain of salt, because this is my first month in this region, and I've been, in Asia, in the States, in Europe before, but not here. But what I'm hearing are two things. One is that, people probably see the telecom more as a threat than as an opportunity, and that's what, we all sitting here together with you guys need to change that. You need to see collaborating with telcos to promote your service as an opportunity to get to a platform where they have access to customers, they have payment mechanisms, they have money, et cetera, and see it more as an opportunity to compete with your service against the big giants of OTT, which are probably the natural competitors for your service, not telcos. So I would say that's number one sort of suggestion. And number two is, unlimited for mobile is a tough value proposition, because the spectrum is limited, and it's not like the fixed line that you have one line for you and that's it. You can use it as much as you want, that the cost doesn't change. So I understand that megabyte per gigabyte, etc., is not the best model, but that's the model everyone is using in the industry. That's a great problem for you guys to work on it and solve it. How can you come up with new creative ways of selling connectivity? And you can come up to telcos, and if the math adapts and the cost structure is the right one, I'm sure most telcos will be interested in trying that and see whether we can turn the wheels on connectivity and offer it in a different way.
140 characters, not 140 megabytes. They're getting nervous in the...
Yeah, so just quickly, I think there's a strong emerging innovation happening. I've been this here for 5 years. I see there's very strong acceleration in things happening locally, which we as a telco are very, very delighted because we actually want local innovation apps, social media services rather than global OTT services which are disrupting our business. Let's have some local passion around it and create local ecosystem, local services, and create great services for our end users.
From my side, I think the testimony for Etisalat is clear, is we want to partner with the startups from this region. We want to create an ecosystem here. The only advice I would ask is, I saw so many ideas are adjacent to each other. Find your niche, make it quality, and find a monetization model. I mean, this is why we built this infrastructure, is to help you monetize. So we're waiting for you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for sticking with us. Hope you enjoyed the conversation and the interesting insights. Great round of applause for our speakers and yourselves. For those who didn't get the chance to ask questions, during the lunch break, everybody is around, and hope to see you next year. Thank you.